For some reason, when I look at a word, I sort of instinctively read it and hear it in my brain somehow. It's hard to explain, but the fact is, I start reading it completely weird, like Earth and.
John's had existential concerns since he was like 3. He thinks about these big questions about existence and death, and like really, God has like, he's like, show me your proof. That doesn't go anywhere with him. He must have been like, I don't know, 6 or 7, and he was actually crying, sort of worrying about like, because of his autism, which, you know, we didn't necessarily label it autism at the time. We knew, but we didn't talk about it that way with him. But he was just like, you know, I'm never going to be able to live. How am I going to feed myself? And we were like, I don't know what book he had read. You know, he reads like way ahead of his grade level, which is great, but sometimes they get introduced to themes that aren't necessarily appropriate for kids as young as him. And so I think he read a book where somebody booted their kid out of the house at 18, and it gave him this idea that he was gonna, like, the day he turned 18, we were gonna be like, okay, see you later. And we were like, no, that's not how it works. People with autism are not supposed to be empathic, or they're not supposed to be emotionally aware of their own experience or someone else's experience. And John has always been really sensitive to how other people feel, and how they're being treated, and very aware of how he feels and able to articulate it in ways that are, I think, quite uncommon for people with autism. That's just him. I mean, he was maybe 4, and we were flying up to see my brother, and we were waiting at SFO, and I had brought Legos because I always have toys. So we're like waiting at the gate, and I've got these Legos, and so he's sitting there playing with Legos right next to me. We're both sitting on the floor, and this boyfriend or stepdad starts verbally berating this girl who was maybe 10 in a really uncomfortable, and like you can tell there's a problem in the family kind of way. Like, I was uncomfortable. First, John crawled into my lap. He didn't say anything, he just crawled into my lap. And I was like, yeah, that's really uncomfortable. And he's like, uh-huh. And then, without saying anything to me, he stood up. And then he like made fists, like down by, and then he took a couple steps toward them, and I had to pull him back and have the heartbreakingly honest conversation with him. It's like, I would like to intervene also, but what I know from bitter life experience is that anything that we might say in this moment is only going to make her life worse, and there is actually nothing we can do, which is heartbreaking.
Hey, I have dodged your thingamabob, your ingenious whatchamacallit. And now I shall be back.
But I have the orb of power! No, not the stick! Ah. I guess because, you know, we're nerds or geeks or whatever, and so there's that trope about like the 25 to 35-year-old still living in mom's basement, like eating Cheetos and like having no life and playing video games all the time, and like he's been exposed to that trope. I think he's read Ready Player One, which is sort of all about video games in the 90s. And so he knows he doesn't want to be that person. And we don't want him to be that person. So we thought it would be relatively simple or possible to tear down our rotting shack of a termite-infested garage that you can't actually put cars in, and rebuild a structure that he could live in. That we could rent to him, that would be like a fully functioning independent apartment for him. Supposedly our garage, although you can't put cars in it, yeah. When we bought it, this gutter was just dropping water on this is the low spot, and then it would just pool here all winter long, rotting the frame of the garage. So autism is a sensory, at its heart, it's a sensory difference. And one of the biggest differences is that autistic people do not filter their perceptions the way that neurotypical people do. I mean, even just having him learn to cross the street safely consistently enough was a long process. Like, I finally released him for that after maybe a couple months into 6th grade. This side of the roof is subsiding and leaning, but not attached to the other half of the roof tree. And then this entire roof is only held up by this cable that's wired from the beam to the top of the roof. But then where the beams attach at the far ends, they're not actually attached to the walls either. It will be more work for him to learn to live independently, right? He has like the things, he'll have to learn the things more consciously, more deliberately, and more slowly than neurotypical kids would. Oh, there was paneling like this on all the walls, but I had to take it down to have the wood treated for termites. The termites were so bad. In the attic part, there were like little drifts of sand, which is actually termite poo, and like little like visible drifts. And so like there's spots where the only roofing is just tar paper and shingles, like the wood is all eaten away and stuff. The way it works best for him is if we can be his landlords. So we can charge him a pittance of rent, like $300 a month. He can get a part-time job working 10 or 15 hours a week, which will not overwhelm him at first, learn to hold down a job, learn to pay tiny little bills. And then over time, as he becomes more capable and is able to do more work, we can raise the rent slowly until it reaches something that would allow him to move wherever he wants. Yeah, so if you can get back here without falling over, but if you look here, you can see where they basically just like, as far as I can tell, they built this addition out of what they had laying around. So they have like one type of siding, and then they have another type of siding, and the windows are clearly all salvaged. He has a lot of anxiety though, like constant high levels of anxiety. And his mind sort of makes up things to be anxious about and tells him stories about how everything he does is gonna fail and no one is gonna help him. And like every tiny setback has this logical chain of consequences that leads to doom. And so having him like adjacent is ideal for that. And you know, how do you pay your bills on time? And you know, you do have to maintain a certain level of cleanliness or your landlord is going to kick you out, right? Like these are small things that he'll need help with. This way, it's like every time that anxiety rises up, it's like, but we have a plan, and so then it just goes back down. Yeah, John's amazing. He loves to hide his capacities. So he'll develop a new capacity and keep it to himself, and then he'll trot it out in some like really well-chosen moment when it will be most surprising. You know, I read to him like Harry Potter or whatever when he was, 3. And I was reading this book written for 12-year-olds, and he started laughing at this inappropriate moment. And I was like, why are you laughing? And he points like 12 lines down the page. He goes, oh, look what she said there. And I was like, what? Like there was no sign that he was learning to read. I wasn't trying to teach him. They weren't teaching him at preschool. Like he just, I don't know.